the agenda. We have two special guests who are joining us today. One is Town Manager Rick Ledwith, and also Mr. Don Poland, who is a consultant for our group, and we graciously welcome them this evening. So I'm going to turn it's 6:02, so we're going to commence the meeting at 6:02, call to order. I apologize. And I'm going to turn the meeting over to Todd.
Thank you, Patricia. Just for the record, Todd Dumay, Town Planner. I'm just going to work through the first few items, which will be really brief on our agenda. We do not have any communications or staff reports or informational items to provide you, so that's items 2 and 3 on our agenda. Item number 4, as a reminder, our next scheduled meeting is that of July 18th. We would like to move forward with that meeting, and at the end of the meeting, Mr. Pudlick will discuss what we expect to conduct and accomplish at that meeting. Moving along to agenda item number 5, I would like to introduce Town Manager Rick Ledwith. Mr. Ledwith has worked for the Town of West Hartford since 2001 in several capacities, most recently at his appointment from acting to full town manager by the Town Council at their regularly scheduled meeting last evening. So congratulations, Rick. He previously served as the Executive Director of Human Resources for 15 years and has worked extensively with just about every municipal department in the West Hartford Public Schools. He and his wife lived in West Hartford for over 25 years and are proud to have raised 3 children. And just like to say thank you for coming and attending the meeting tonight, Rick, and I'll turn it over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Todd. And it is good to see everybody. Good to put some faces to some names. And I really do appreciate the invitation to tonight's meeting. And, really, I'll start by apologizing for having not attended sooner. And certainly would not want to send the message to this group that the work that you're all doing and have been doing for the last couple of months is not important. In fact, as we move forward, it'll be my intent to attend as many meetings as possible over the next couple of months, including the July 18th meeting. So in addition, I think at that point, that would conclude with ultimately a presentation to the Town Council with a draft of an affordable housing plan. And as you know, and I hope you do know, that the Town Council is very interested in the potential for an affordable housing plan. And I think and for them and hopefully for all of you as well, it's more than just a compliance task. So it's more than just meeting the letter of the law of 8-30J. It's really what we feel is an opportunity to create a plan that embraces some of our core community values like equity and diversity, that ultimately can be demonstrated in a plan that offers a variety of housing options that meets the needs of our residents today and future residents at every income level, not unlike what we have today in West Hartford now, but just more formalizing a plan that helps provides a roadmap for our council and really for our plan of conservation and development as well. So I've learned a lot in my first 4 months on the job, and I look forward to getting up to speed with the work that this committee has been doing over the last few months and learning a lot from all of you as well. So I appreciate the opportunity to say hello. And I look forward to working much more closely with each of you as we move forward. So thank you. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you, Rick. I'd like to move us along. So our next business item on the agenda was agenda item number 6. That was a summary of our outreach efforts to date. We're going to flip that to the end to make room for a presentation from Mr. Donald Poland. But before I do so, I also wanted to introduce another important staff member, Mr. Dwayne Martin. If you could kind of wave to everyone, Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin is the Director of Community Development. He has also worked for the town since 2005. Like Mr. Ledwith, he has served in several capacities, most recently in his appointment to the Director of Community Development. In that role, he oversees the planning, zoning, engineering, and building divisions. Prior to that, he previously served as the town manager, and I expect that he might attend some of our meetings going forward. So I just wanted to welcome Mr. Martin to this meeting as well. Thank you. Dwayne?
Thanks, Todd. Just wanted to say hello for those of you who I have not met yet. I've worked for the town for a while on the engineering side and have worked with the Planning and Zoning Division on many matters, but not a lot on projects like this. So I am excited to learn more about it and do plan on attending more meetings and getting more information as the process moves along. So without further ado, thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Dwayne. And next, I'd like to move into the bulk of our meeting this evening, which is a presentation from Mr. Poland. That was a presentation that was sent out via email, a PowerPoint called Understanding Housing Markets and Affordable Housing, Economics and Financial Feasibility to the group. Mr. Poland is a geographer, planner, and community strategist with the firm Gorman in York. His work focuses on assisting communities to compete for wealth and investment through strategic market, land use, and planning interventions that build community confidence, foster pride in place, and create governance capacity and grow market demand. With 24 years of experience in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors and academic sectors, Dr. Donald Poland offers a unique perspective and approach to addressing social, economic, governance challenges and maintaining resilient, vibrant, and prosperous communities. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy from the University College of London and Master's in Geography, and a Master and Bachelor's degree of Geography from Central Connecticut State University. With that, I will turn it over to you, Brian. We might need to assign presentation privileges to Mr. Poland.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate the introduction. And WebEx has given me sharing privileges. So now I just have to figure out what I'm doing. Hopefully my presentation is coming up on the screen for you. Just give me a minute so I can set up you guys on my screen. So, good evening, and thank you for having me here tonight. So tonight I want to give a presentation on kind of housing markets, affordable housing, and ultimately a little bit about the financial feasibility of affordable housing. So we're going to go through a number of topics here. In the interest of time, I'm going to kind of pass through this slide a bit quickly, but we're going to look at some demographics and 8-30G, some development figures related to 8-30G and so forth. But I want to start out with some of the basics, kind of why affordable housing now. As you are all probably aware, based on the establishment of this committee that you're serving on, Public Act 17170 requires now that municipalities at least once every 5 years prepare an affordable housing plan. Unfortunately, that statute was very vague, didn't explain how to or what to include, nor did it actually give any advice for the formal adoption. But the fact is we need to do it, and there are entities right now looking at improving that legislation. But I want to be clear in the fact that this isn't really new. The fact is statutory authority for zoning and statutory authority for the POCD, the Plan of Conservation and Development, has required for over 30 years now that we consider these things. So in 8-23 on the POCD, it says to include opportunities, to make provisions for housing opportunities, including multifamily dwellings in all residents of the municipality and planning region, so that local and regional look. And then also the idea of promoting housing choice and economic diversity in housing, including both low and moderate income households. So essentially the statutes have told us for over 30 years that we need to plan for affordable housing. So Public Act, or what is now 8-30J, really kind of sets the message straight, or confirms the fact that we must plan for it and therefore produce an affordable housing plan. Why affordable housing? From my perspective, it provides social, economic, housing provides social and economic stability to households, families, and communities. Also, a big part of it is in the context of economic development, homes are where jobs go at night. There's a symbiotic relationship between economic development and housing. And therefore, we need to focus, if we want to focus on economic development, we also need to focus on housing. Quality affordable housing is key to social and economic prosperity. Diversity is the cornerstone of resilience, and resilient communities can and do withstand shock, disturbance, and change. I would actually say, and I'll talk more about this as I go through this tonight, I'll actually say that there is a diverse aspect to West Hartford when we talk about housing. Unlike many communities, you have a wide variety of housing stock, much more so than many other communities out there. Past generations have benefited from affordable housing and the associated wealth creation, and present and future generations should also. And when the market does not meet the basic needs of society, government has a role to assist in those needs. So on the right-hand side is the Venn diagram for what is sustainability, and this idea of social, environmental, and economic overlapping into a sustainable whatever, in this sense, a sustainable community or sustainable housing. I think in planning, too often, though, we have privileged the environment over the social and economic. That is, and maybe not so much West Hartford, but that is many communities focus more so on, open space conservation and, historic preservation than we actually do on things like economic development or housing or affordable housing. And the key part to that diagram, to that definition by the Brundtland Commission, is the last sentence that says, doing so must integrate and balance economic, environmental, and social goals. And I think from a government's perspective, that means we have to find a balance, that we have to make trade-offs, and we have to figure out how can we balance these three goals, social, environmental, and economic. And housing and affordable housing, from my perspective, sit right in the middle of the economic and the social. So why housing matters? Symbiotic relationship with economic development and housing. Housing is where jobs go at night, as I already said. From that perspective, if West Hartford doesn't provide a housing stock that meets the needs and wants of the workforce, it'll be difficult to retain and attract jobs. And I could say that for any community. I could say that for the Hartford region overall. For West Hartford to remain competitive, it must provide a housing stock that meets the needs and wants of the consumers, today's renters and home buyers. For me, and I'll probably talk about this more at future presentations and while going through future data, but we've seen a change in the housing market. And it's really a change in demographics, that our household structure has changed so dramatically. So 2 key points I'll just make quickly. In 1960 America, only 13% of households were single person. Today, 28% of households are single person. That's a dramatic shift. In 1970s America, over 40% of households were married couples with children. Today, only 19% of households are married couples with children. Our demographics have changed dramatically, which have changed the needs and wants for housing dramatically. So if you go back to, say, 2005, about 23% of building permits, housing permits issued in Connecticut were for multifamily. Today, about 48% of all housing permits issued are multifamily. That is a reflection of that demographic change. So including affordable housing is critical for fostering economic prosperity, generational wealth, and upward mobility. And it's also about meeting the needs of our changing consumers. So this next section's on really the spatial organization of housing markets at the metropolitan scale. There's exceptions to all these rules, but in some ways, these are pretty solid rules at a metropolitan scale as to how housing markets organize. First and foremost, density is highest at the core and lowest at the periphery. And I think intuitively, we all recognize that. The further you get away from Hartford, the lower the density becomes. Income. So with income, as income increases, land consumption and floor area consumption increase. Typically, higher income households have larger homes and larger lots. And if they don't have larger lots because they're living on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, they still have larger homes. So we consume, more as wealth increases. So a wealthy household typically consumes more than a household of lesser means. In West Hartford, just to provide some context here, 65% of your housing stock is single family detached. That's actually right there with the state number. The state's 64, 65%. 69.4% is owner occupied. 63% of all housing units have 3 bedrooms or more. On the 3 bedrooms or more, and I'll talk about this at a later date, that to me is an indication of families or households with children, that it's housing designed for larger households. And in some ways, today you could argue that it's housing designed for past generations. That if 50 years ago, 40% of households were married couples with children, and today only 19% are, then we see that the housing stock that was built 50 years ago was designed to meet a need of a past generation and not necessarily today's generation. There are exceptions. Amenity values to a community are extremely important. Access to transportation, or the access that transportation provides to job opportunities, sense of place, quality of life, and I could go on and on. In the context of West Hartford, you're centrally located, well positioned, accessible, strong sense of place, strong sense of community, and a high quality of life. It's not surprising that maybe housing is expensive in West Hartford. It's a desirable place to be in a great location. So land value. Land or rent is highest near the center and lowest near the periphery. A household of a given income can access a larger home or larger floor area on more land, larger lots, further from the center. And housing costs essentially adjust for location, time distance equation between home and employment. So this picture on the right-hand side on the bottom is a house that I previously owned in Stafford Springs. It was exactly a half hour from downtown Hartford without any rush hour traffic. And we purchased it for $136 a square foot. I did a comparable sales analysis on MLS, identified comparable properties in South Windsor and West Hartford, had to adjust for land size because I couldn't find 3-acre lots in those communities being closer in. But ultimately, you see there what occurs. A comparable house, same square footage, same number of bedrooms, same number of baths, same number of garages, ultimately goes from $136 a square foot at a half hour outside the core to $195 a square foot in a community like West Hartford. Now, mind you, there's other amenity values in there, quality of education, quality of life, so forth and so on. But it starts to explain the spatial organization of metropolitan regions. And metropolitan regions are essentially labor markets. People and firms locate in them for access to employment opportunities. This poorly designed graphic on my part, but the best I could do. Basically, my theoretical or past house in Stafford Springs out at the fringe. A home in West Hartford as a comparable place. Hartford as the core being shown in red. And ultimately, if the average commute time, which I think in the Hartford region is about 26 minutes, then on a 26-minute commute from Stafford, I can only access about half of the labor market. I would have to commute near to an hour to access the entire labor market. Whereas someone in West Hartford can probably access about 85% of the labor market being centrally located. That's the time distance equation and the accessibility equation that ultimately drives up value nearer to the core. As a commodity, and this is something I always have fun with my students, but if you think about it, housing's a unique commodity. It's probably the only commodity other than land and commercial buildings also that's fixed in location. It's non-movable. So a house, as I just showed you, comparable house in West Hartford and Stafford Springs sell at different values. If I put my phone up for sale on eBay, or if I put my car up for sale on, whatever website, it doesn't matter whether that car is located, that commodity is located in West Hartford or Stafford Springs, its value is relatively the same. So that being fixed in location impacts value. The fact that it's durable and long lasting impacts value on housing. The temporal aspect, that it's built at a specific moment in time to meet the specific consumer needs at that moment in time, is very unique. You can't upgrade to, the house 3.2 version. Yes, you can do renovations and so forth, but they're also costly. They're also durable, and so forth. So very different than other commodities, and therefore subject to the forces of creative destruction. That is, the newest product on the market has the potential to creatively destroy previous products on the market. Put these things together, and housing, the moment it's built and constructed, is moving towards a potential future of functional obsolescence. That doesn't mean it all gets there, but some of it can. In many asset classes within real estate, especially commercial stuff, if you think of kind of the 1950s and 60s strip retail, we have a lot of functionally obsolescent, real property out there. So this house, this modern house, is competing with this 1800s house or 1700s house in Old Wethersfield. These things last on the landscape and continue to compete. So spatial temporal outcome of housing as a commodity. This line in the center is space and time. We can assume that time and space start here, so this is the core. And if we move outwards in space and time, say from 1950s America to today, housing size has continually increased, lot sizes have continually increased in space and time, and ultimately the amenities packages of housing has increased from what it previously was, therefore ultimately driving up costs and driving down affordability. So defining affordable housing, this is probably one of the most challenging things because there's really no set definition for what is affordable housing, and it depends on the context in which we're discussing it. Generally, the HUD definition is that if you spend more than 30% of your household income, then housing is too expensive. I'm sorry, I saw a hand there. Herman, is it? Okay. All right. So HUD basically says if you spend more than 30% of your household income, then housing is unaffordable. The higher you go over that 30%, the less affordable it becomes. Another definition that's also often finds its way into the media is the idea of the median price of a 2-bedroom apartment compared to household income. That one I'm not a big fan of because the fact in Connecticut, 40% of renter households are single person. Not everyone needs a 2-bedroom apartment, so I'm not sure why that's always used as the standard for what's an affordable rental. CHFA in most of their programs, they use median family income, which is a higher number to define affordability. So in the Hartford Metropolitan region, median family income is $112,000, while median household income is only $77,000. That's a dramatic difference if you're using CHFA's median family income for what is affordable versus if you're using 8-30G with the median household income. So we have to be clear as to what it is we're talking about. In the context of community planning, in the context of land use, and in the context of 8-30G, when we talk about the Affordable Housing Appeals List, we are talking about median household income as the number to achieve for affordability. 8-30G narrowly defines affordable housing from my perspective. That's not a criticism, it's just a statement as to what it is. So it says that assisted housing, housing which receives financial assistance from any government program, low or moderate income housing, including rental assistance, is deemed affordable. And then there's the 8-30G set aside development. That is specific developments created under 8-30G where not less than 30% of the units are deed restricted for 40 years, sold or rented at prices for which households pay 30% or less of their income equal to 80% AMI, and half the units, 15%, have to be at 80% AMI, and half the units, 15%, have to be at 60% AMI. The reason why I say this is narrow, a definition, is it doesn't necessarily include market rate housing that may actually sell or rent at affordable rates. And it does not measure supply and demand for affordable housing. And also in that calculation of spending 30% or more of your household income, we rarely give attention to the fact that there are households that intentionally spend more, buying into a school system, buying into a community, buying into a lifestyle. So not everyone's spending 30% or more is doing so because they can't afford it, but some maybe because they're making choices. Two basic methods. These are back of the napkin kind of calculations, quick and simple to kind of get an idea if things are affordable. The first is on purchase value, 2.6 to 3 times gross household income. So if households earning $75,000, multiply it by 3, they can probably afford a mortgage for $225,000, probably afford a house for a little bit higher than that. The lower number, the 2.6, is giving some breathing room for utilities and so forth. And then the percent of income is just the 30% calculation. Household earning $75,000 a year at 30% of their income has $22,500 to spend on income, and they have 18 or per year or $1,875 per month. That means basically in the Hartford regions, somewhere around probably $1,600 a month rent, not including utilities, is an 80% AMI affordable rent. And then that from 1,600 up to the 1,875 accounts for the utility costs. So in West Hartford, median household income, $105,000, put your housing in the range, an affordable range of $273,000 to $315,000. And the median home value, this is a census number I pulled of 330. I also looked recently at Zillow and Realtor and some other real estate sites. And right now with the kind of bubble, I think your housing's running a bit higher than that, probably around 350, 360. But essentially divide that number by 3 and we come up with, you probably need a household income of 120,000, 126,000 or so to actually afford buying into the median home value within the West Hartford community. The fact is, those numbers actually kind of nail it when you think about, you have a median household income of 105,000, your median home value is tracking relatively well with your income. So determining housing need, I already touched on some of this, but there are limitations to it in the way we think about it. But I think you can really think about the problem in 2 ways. Either, and this is simplified, but I think it's important, either a household earns too little income to afford housing. That's one affordability problem. Or housing costs are too expensive for a household of a certain income to afford housing. And let me explain that. If we're talking Boston, DC, San Francisco, New York, the hottest markets in the country, then housing is too expensive for households of certain incomes to afford housing. Meaning you could earn $120,000 a year and and still be priced out of the housing market because it's just so expensive. That's a different affordability problem than households that earn too little. And I would say Connecticut's problem is more on it's more of an income-based problem than it actually is a housing market, housing value problem. That's not to say housing is inexpensive in Connecticut, but I think when we get further into analysis, we'll start seeing that the greatest needs are at the lowest incomes. I know there's a lot of information on these slides and you guys have them and can read them in detail. I'm just going to try and hit highlights. So 8-30G, I already touched upon. It's a specific statute that was adopted 31, 32 years ago to promote the development of affordable housing. And it was kind of the stick rather than the carrot approach. And that basically said if a community of 10% or more of your housing was not qualified as affordable, then you were susceptible to 8-30G, which meant that a developer, provided they were meeting the requirements of 30% affordable at 60 and 80% AMI, that they could circumvent aspects of zoning, such as density, to get a affordable housing development approved. It's been extremely controversial. It's still controversial in many ways. There's many people out there that love it and want to see it stay. There's many people out there that hate it, and there's many in between. I, in one sense, like 8-30G in that I think the legislature gave a directive 30 years ago and said, plan for affordable housing or else suffer the consequences. And I think as a state as a whole, we've probably done a poor job of planning for affordable housing, and therefore many communities still suffer the consequences. That being said, it's an imperfect policy tool that I have a lot of criticisms of, that it probably hasn't achieved what it was designed to achieve. And if it were changed or modified, it could probably achieve more. And I'll explain that a bit later. So the qualified housing, I already discussed. In the set-asides, I already discussed on the previous slide. A little more detail here on this slide. So this is a map that was done by a Connecticut Department of Housing, looking at the spatial distribution of affordable housing, or at least in the context of the 8-30G appeals list of how communities qualify or don't qualify. Let me close the door. My apologies. Sorry about that. I had a dog barking in the background. Not sure if you could hear it. So the green is 10% or more qualified affordable housing, mostly older communities. The blue is communities that are 5 to 10%, and the yellow are communities that are less than 5%. I think the spatial distribution on a state level is kind of interesting. The fact is, the Hartford region has far more affordable housing than many other regions within the state, which on one level is good. We still have a lot of yellows and there's still many communities that are blue, but overall a decent distribution. West Hartford, most recent numbers I pulled down show West Hartford as having 7.82% of its housing stock as qualified affordable. That totals approximately 2,065 units. If we used the more recent census data, the 2020 census data on the number of housing units in the community, and applied the affordable to that, your rate drops a little bit. So when the Department of Housing starts to use the 2020 census data, it's likely that your rate is going to ratchet down just a little bit, giving you a heads up there, so you're not surprised when it happens. Constraints to multifamily housing. This is a map that was done by CHFA, and it looks at where multifamily housing is allowed as of right in yellow, or special permit conditional use in gray, in red being communities that prohibit affordable multifamily housing, not affordable, just multifamily. And once again, we see this kind of, uneven distribution, this over reliance on special permits, and the prohibition out in the more rural communities. Some of those possibly justifiable due to well, septic, topography, and other limitations, soil conditions. Some of them possibly exclusionary by intention. So mobility and labor market accessibility. There's a challenge. At the end of the day, it's why I started with that idea of the spatial organization of the housing market. There's a challenge in kind of how do we meet what's often termed fair share across communities? Because all communities aren't created equal, especially in the context of geography and location and accessibility to the marketplace. So this creates a spatial paradox for housing policy. Disproportionately clustering low-income households in the urban core harms those households and communities due to the associated socioeconomic ills and poor education performance with large concentrations of poverty. This is something we're well aware of. So then providing affordable housing for low-income households in more affluent rural fringe communities provides greater educational opportunities, but runs the risk of economic isolation due to limited access to employment. And then if you consider ultimately the public transportation network and that it doesn't stretch out into these rural fringe areas, you really do run that risk of isolation by putting the poor out at the fringe. So housing and affordable housing policy must seek to strike a balance between clustering poverty in the core and the economic isolation of low-income households at the periphery. And how do we best do that? For West Hartford, you're not the core specifically, and nor are you the periphery. You are a well-located community with great accessibility. And therefore, I think that's the reason why you already have a diverse housing stock. You already have a fair amount of qualified affordable housing. And it's about trying to strike a balance maybe moving forward, or at least maintaining that balance. There has been recent proposals at the legislature for fair share housing. This would, whether it replaces 8-30G or it's just another way of getting at 8-30G is yet to be seen. But essentially, this proposal that was put forward looks at this complex calculation based on location, accessibility to transportation, labor market, income, municipal budgets, and kind of this idea of a community being able to absorb affordable housing and then allocates a fair share of affordable housing to each community in Connecticut, as shown on the map to the right-hand side. For West Hartford, you mostly stay the same. Your municipal fair share allocation says that you need 1,905 housing units based on that approach, which is actually less than the 10% required, or 10% threshold not required, but threshold set by 8-30G of 2640, and your existing qualified housing already exceeds the fair share calculation. So if the fair share were to be passed or were to circumvent 8-30G, replace it, you would probably come into at least compliance under that approach. For me, it's just, change the way you measure and you change the outcome. It doesn't get rid of the fact that there still is a need for affordable housing. So income and housing costs, owner and renter occupied. This is a little bit of the data that I just want to provide some context to, because I don't think we always think of things in this way. So median household incomes, for the region, this is for the Hartford region, based on size of family, and 80% AMI we see there for a family of 4 is 83,000. But for a single person household, it's 58,000. Once again, thinking about that household structure changes, more single person households, you can see where housing becomes more burdensome for a single person household than maybe for a 2, 3, or 4 person household. 60% AMI is a meaningful drop in value and income from 80% AMI. So these numbers here are then translated into what's 30% of a person's income, the maximum they can spend on housing in a given year. And this table then translates that to monthly. Just it allows us to think about what incomes can afford on a yearly basis, on a monthly basis. And then I also provide table 4 here, which provides a calculation for hourly wage by AMI and household size for 1 and 2 person households. Once again, we don't necessarily think of wages in the context of housing affordability, just a way to provide context here. These next 2 slides, I think, are some of the most interesting and more important. And that is looking at the rental affordability in Hartford County. There really is 2 different markets, the existing housing stock and the newly constructed rental housing. We often talk about how expensive newly constructed housing is, and it is. It's expensive because it's expensive to build. It's actually really challenging to create affordable housing through new construction. The existing housing stock is actually much more affordable than new housing. So I give you rent amounts over here, state compared to Hartford County over here, household incomes on this side, state and Hartford County compared. And then up here are just some basic market numbers on the size of units, the average size of units being constructed today in the rental market, and the average kind of rent values that are being generated based on the number of bedrooms. What we find with existing units is that the median rent on existing rental units is $1,130. That's actually a very affordable number. It's actually affordable at 60% AMI. And we also find that only 19% of existing rents are above $1,500 a month, which is approximately 80% AMI. So the existing housing stock actually has quite a bit of affordability built into it. Not in every community. I would argue much of this affordable product is in Hartford County is probably clustered into New Britain and Hartford. So not equally dispersed, but there is a lot of affordable product that's not qualified affordable that's out there. New construction, though, is not affordable at 60% AMI, 60 and 80% AMI. It's just too costly to build that it becomes unaffordable. And this is where government intervention is needed if the desire is to require affordable housing through new construction. And it's the reason why there's programs like low-income tax credits. There's reasons why developers now go to towns seeking tax abatement assistance on housing developments. It is very challenging to actually build a product in the marketplace overall, but then more importantly, with an affordability component. This next slide here, and you can take some time on your own to look at it, similar calculations, but I worked in the utility requirements using the Department of Housing voucher program as a baseline for estimating utility costs. And essentially what I'm trying to show here, or what I do show here, is ultimately that, if a household can afford, if a one-person household can afford $13,000 a year in rental income, in housing costs, when we deduct $1,300 a year in utility costs from that, the income available for rent itself is $11,800, driving the value of the rent down lower. So remember, when we're talking about calculating affordability, we have to account for utility costs in those calculations. The home ownership side, I'm going to just pass through this very quickly. Very similar to the rental slide that you saw. But the fact is, to afford a median owner-occupied home based on census data, not the most recent housing market requires about $80,000 a year, $81,000, tracking with kind of median household income. We kind of expect that number to be there. 35.1% of owner-occupied household housing units are valued at less than $200,000. There's quite a bit of affordable product out there. Once again, not evenly distributed across all communities. And 32% valued between 200 and 300,000. Once again, a lot of affordable product out there. The same again, trying to achieve affordable housing through new construction. If challenging at best on the rental market, extremely challenging, if not nearly impossible on the home building side. This slide, I'm not going to run through all the numbers. I just want to get you down to the bottom here. Basically, what these numbers end up telling us, if you work your way all the way through this, is that the greatest need for affordable housing in Connecticut and in Hartford County, and I would also argue in West Hartford, even though I haven't crunched the specific numbers as of yet, the greatest need is below 50% AMI. And the greatest need below 50% AMI is actually below 30% AMI. The fact is, the greatest need for affordable housing is well below 60 and 80% AMI, which 8-30G addresses. So we're not going to solve the affordable housing issue through 8-30G and targeting 80 and 60% AMI. That being said, that doesn't mean we stop providing affordable housing at 80 and 60% AMI. Because when we do provide affordable at those levels, we relieve downward pressure on the housing market overall. So we still do have to focus on those numbers, but I think we have to be realistic and say we're not going to solve housing affordability simply through the land use system. Greater interventions through government are needed. So Hartford County breakdown of households spending 30% or more of their income. This proves my statements on the prior slide. For households of $20,000 or less in income, 19 on the renter end, nearly 20% spend more than 30%. You move up to 35,000, and it's 15. What you see is with each incremental increase in income, the percent spending more than 30% of their income on housing is declining. And when we get above $50,000 a year into the kind of 60 to 80% AMI range, we see a substantial drop. And over $75,000 in income, median household income, essentially, if it's 77,000, we see a drop to almost nothing. So the fact is, the greatest need for affordable housing is at the lowest incomes. And I did this for West Hartford also. You guys aren't as steep as the county as far as, you know, those paying over at lowest incomes, but your greatest need is at your lowest income levels. So this is some of the demographics I mentioned earlier. But a big thing is, at the end of the day, the reason why our household sizes are changing and structure are changing, one of the key reasons is fertility rates. Our fertility rates at the national level and the state level continue to plummet. Connecticut's fertility rate in 2008 was 1.88. You need 2.1 to 2.3 to replace a population. We've dropped now in 12 years to 2020, we've dropped to 1.53. We are having fewer children than we've ever had before, and that's the plummeting married couple households with children from over 40% down to 19%. So nationally, 28% of households are single person compared to 13% in 1960, which I already told you. And the percent of children living with their mother increased from 8% to 23% living with only their mother. And the same on the father side, from 1% to 4%. My point here is a lack of affordable housing most harms single mothers. The fact is, it's more likely for a single mom to be in need. So I think we have to keep that in mind on the social side. And most of the housing stock, especially single family detached, was built to serve the needs of family households of the past, not smaller, predominantly 1 and 2 person households of today. I have this slide I do in other presentations showing sitcoms through the decades, starting in the 1950s up till today. And we go from the Leave It to Beavers to the Brady Bunches to the Family Ties to then the Friends and the Sex and the Cities. And you see the diminishing family context of sitcoms. And that's because there's no more 40% of the population being married couples with children sitting home watching TV. It's mirroring what's happening to our demographics. So household size for Hartford County, renter households, 43% are single person. Look at this, even owner-occupied households, 23%, 2 persons, 36%. We just don't have the large households we have anymore, and this data is replicated on these graphics over here. So I believe the last significant section of this presentation now is this case study of 8-30G. A few years ago, I was asked by a developer, not in West Hartford, but in a Hartford suburban community, to take a look at a potential site for an 8-30G development. And I was trying to get my head around the affordability numbers in the market, and that led to the creation of this this portion of the presentation of just looking at, so we're going to have 400 units, 280 are multifamily, the 30 are market rate, the 30% is 120 units, 60 at 80% AMI and 60 at 60% AMI. This is the bedroom mix of the units, the mix of the 60 and 80% AMI. And then I went through and kind of looked at, well, how does this compare with market rate and rental rates? And basically, these are the average square footage of multifamily units being built in the market today. 100% AMI is actually runs higher than in the lower, smaller bedrooms. What is market rate? Market rate on the studio is around 1,300. On a 1-bedroom is around 1,600. If people were paying 100% AMI rents, about 80% AMI, we're not stepping down from 100% AMI. We're probably stepping down from like 93% AMI to 80% AMI because the market rents don't run that high until you get to the 3-bedroom rents. So you see a 80% AMI rent running higher than a market rate rent for the studios and 1-bedrooms. I then did it again, bringing in the utility costs to this and showing that ultimately the utilities drive down the potential rent overall. And then in the next slide, so in the last slide here, oh, I'm sorry. So the adjusted housing utility costs. So this is the key point I'm trying to make here. When we talk about 8-30G and the developer having to produce 30% of the housing as affordable to avoid the zoning requirements, ultimately, it's a government policy saying that the private sector, private developer should cover the costs of affordable housing. But we also say that that housing, that 30% of income includes utilities. So the policy is actually saying that we have to cover, the private market is to subsidize the rent and also subsidize the cost of utilities for that household. And when you do these numbers as to what is exactly, an achievable rent, and then the affordability calculations, a studio unit will lose, $400 in revenue. a 1-bedroom will lose $1,000. And then you multiply these out over the course of a year and over the course of the development, we get really large numbers. And that's what the effective rent results in the net loss on this 400 unit development, a net loss of $450,000 in income into that development, or 8 to 10% of the total operating income. My point being is it's very hard to actually develop an affordable housing development at 30% of the units as affordable at 80 and 60% AMI. I see the hand up. I'll get to it 1 second. Kevin, thank you. And so just on a kind of side note, I said, I have critiques of 8-30G. The fact is, when you ratchet down the requirement, if you say rather than 30% of the units, if you say 20% or 15%, the economics become more viable. It's easier to absorb the affordability into the overall development. So that's where some of my critiques lie that I kind of opened with, is that there's other ways to structure this to maybe get more affordable housing built. And I think on the local municipality level, that's also something to think about. If you end up considering an inclusionary zoning provision that said maybe 12% or 15% affordability components, that's definitely more achievable than the 30% required in 8-30G. Yes, Kevin. Oh, I think you're muted.
I can't unmute.
There you go. You're unmuted.
There we go. All right, there we go. First of all, let me just say this has been a very good, and I thank the planning office for engaging you, because I think this has been very, very good. Not least of all because I think it's the first time we've had a chance to put this in a somewhat hard economic perspective. So thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to clarify a few things very quickly that are in the report, and you did touch on a couple of these. So leaving aside the fact that you mentioned there will be an adjustment for the 2020 census yet to come.
Yeah.
I think what you indicate is that we would otherwise already be at or above the so-called quote unquote fair share standard.
Yeah.
And will be within 600 or 700 affordable units as a threshold for the statutory standard. Does that sound about right?
Correct.
Okay. Which is, I mean, I'm not suggesting that 600 or 750 units is a small goal, but it's not as daunting as may have seemed. You also talk about the comparisons between rental and single family, and then single family in a traditional sort of look at 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, and apartments, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom. Is it fair to assume that the economics get better for developers and get better therefore affordability to the extent that communities allow developments with a mixture of unit types rather than a single type of unit in that multi-unit development, to the extent that we allow mixed use, commercial combined with residential, and to the extent that we allow the conversion of existing residential? Do the economics get better with those choices?
Yeah, I think with diversity overall, the economics work better. So my point being is multifamily. Am I feeding back? I'm getting some feedback here.
There is a feedback, but it's not bad.
Okay. So having a mixture of 1, 2, a small percentage of 3 bedrooms probably makes more sense than the community's tendency to go overwhelmingly with just 1 and 2 bedrooms. I think also if you can work in studios. So a mix in the unit types, I think is beneficial. Number two, then the mixed use. Well, there's some challenges of mixed use on the financing side of the world. The fact is, I think more and more we're seeing a symbiotic relationship between commercial and residential development. There used to be a saying in the retail industry that retail follows rooftops, that retail follows housing. And today, I think it can also be said that housing follows retail, because many old large strip malls, regional enclosed malls, are being repositioned with the addition of multifamily housing as part of the development. So that symbiotic relationship revealing itself, and once again, mixed use as being a more diverse option. Sorry if that was lengthy. Oh, you're muted again, Kevin.
Mute me. Okay. The last question is could you just clarify a little bit more for me? The quote that I remember, and your deck is not paginated, so I can't tell you exactly what page this appears on.
Oh, my apologies.
No, that's fine. Believe me, it's at least the report is very good. The comment is that the best opportunity, quote unquote, for West Hartford would be between the 60% and 80% AMI compared to 50. So tell me say a little bit more.
I think economically, from getting affordable housing built, I think recent product being built in your community, rental product, is some of it, if it's studio or one bedroom, is hovering at or just above 80% AMI. So I think there is an opportunity to absorb a 70% AMI, maybe in some cases a 60% AMI into proposed developments, so long as the total percent isn't too high, so long as you're not forcing 30% or whatever. But I think it's the sweet spot for an opportunity to get affordable housing built. I see other hands out there, but I also saw, I think, Gail waving at one point, so I wanted to give her an opportunity.
Thanks. Yes, I'm a landlord in New York, and my buildings are mixed-use buildings, and I also have rent-stabilized units. And when the landlord's limited in income, it's very, very important to have commercial spaces within those buildings. It's just really important. It helps a lot in paying taxes.
Yeah.
And it helps a lot to defray the costs because, as you've shown, many of these apartments the landlord takes a loss on. And there's only up to a certain point that you can absorb a loss, especially if the taxes go up and the insurance has gone up mightily, and water costs. So I think it's really important to have commercial spaces. That's it.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
So I have two other hands. I didn't see which one of you went up first. If you don't mind, I'll just call on Greg.
Hi, thank you. Quick question about the deck. You have the construction costs at 200 a square foot for rental and 220. Is that reflecting just regular development? Is that reflecting affordable housing, financing, a mix? Where are we at on that?
Yeah, actually, thank you for mentioning that, because I didn't update that number. I probably should have tweaked those up a little bit. They were pre-pandemic numbers as kind of just a starting point of what I would use on estimating construction costs. Don't interpret it as an actual, but kind of a fair starting point. To be honest with you, today I'm seeing construction costs pushing up around 240, 250 a square foot, and it's regardless of affordability. But what it ends up showing is that if the return is less because of an affordability component, then justifying the front end cost, construction cost becomes more challenging. So,
And as a general proposition, pure affordable housing, low-income housing tax credit property development is much more expensive because of the tape one has to go through. Is that accurate?
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. You know, in some ways, through this presentation, I'm not conceptualizing the low-income housing tax credit, recognizing, however, it could come into play that sometimes these 8-30G developments do seek those out after the fact. But we were on this hypothetical, we were trying to get at, could we make this work without tax credits? Which became really questionable, and then the pandemic happened. So,
And then, sorry, just two more quick questions. Just
sure.
you referenced that, you know, the sort of sweet spot was the 70%, 80% AMI. That would be the achievable. But I just wanted to clarify. You noted that it's below 50% where there's the greatest need, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so
Oh, continue.
I can say so in terms of, you know, it's more easily achieved to get more affordable housing at 70-80%, but it would have a less of an impact in terms of the folks who actually need the affordable housing if we went that route.
Yes, I mean, I could still make the argument that there's people at 70% AMI that are in need of affordable housing, so you're still satisfying a need. I think for me, I'm trying to stress kind of a public policy point here, and maybe it's I don't know, a critique of the zoning perspective. There's, you know, there's a lot of talk around 8-30G. There's a lot of talk about affordable housing. And if we only did certain things like, you know, allowed accessory apartments or built more 80% AMI, that we can solve, you know, all these social economic ills. And my point is kind of the fact is the land use system cannot solve the greatest need for affordable housing, which is below 50% AMI. That also means, I think, implied in that statement is that municipality most likely can't solve affordable housing below 50% AMI without state or federal assistance, that the cost becomes too high. So for me, it's just a statement about, I think we need to have our eyes wide open from a policy perspective as to the true challenges of addressing, you know, the significant need for affordable housing below 50% AMI.
And you actually anticipated my last question for the most part there, but I guess I just want to say, in terms of looking at these numbers and these case studies, this is really coming from a perspective that, based upon market forces and developing housing that is profitable, this is the analysis. But if we're looking at housing from a perspective of the social good or social need, it would be a different calculation, right? If one is willing to set up a system that absorbs a loss, that would be a way to meet those lower rent needs.
Definitely. And just to be clear, once again, kind of operating within the framework of 8-30G and land use that says, you know, we're going to require the private sector to build these units at these income levels. You know, there's other programs like low income tax credits, and there's even other programs, things like Habitat for Humanity, that get at affordable housing in a much different way and have a much greater ability to address the greatest need. So
thank you. I really enjoyed the deck. Thanks.
Thanks. And just don't interpret it as me saying, you know, we can't do that. That's not what I'm saying. So it was Matt, I think.
Thank you. Can you just, and maybe this is for further research that we have to do as a group, speak to the number of bedrooms. I recognize the sweet spot in terms of AMI being in this 60-80 space for us, but is there a need for more 3-bedroom as opposed to studio when we're talking about affordable housing?
Yeah, so my general feeling, and this is based on the market research we do on housing developments for developers, the fact is the most desirable unit out there, I'm going to say this in a few ways, most desirable unit out there today is the 2-bedroom unit. And then the oversized 1-bedroom, the 1-bedroom with a den is also very popular. But the 1 and 2 become the most popular. We see the fewest amount of studios being built and the fewest amount of 3 bedrooms being built. The 3-bedroom end is usually a pushback from a municipality because they're afraid of school-aged children, even though the developers wouldn't mind adding some 3 bedrooms into it. So my general take is this. If you look at these percentages here, I would say 5 to 10 on studio. I would say 20 to 30% on 1 bedrooms. I would say probably around 40% on 2 bedrooms. And if you could get 10% of 3 bedrooms, that'd probably be a good balanced mix in the demand overall in the marketplace. Only doing the 1 and 2 bedrooms, I think, creates and this is a developer telling me, who has a number of 3 bedrooms in a new development. He has a lot of divorced dads on the waiting list for 3 bedrooms. And so my point being is I think there's certain niches in the market, in the rental market, that are still seeking the 3-bedroom unit. If I could just wrap up these final slides here, you guys can do this on your own. I do these calculations also on the single family house, but it's square foot size that I'm changing. And as you'll notice, as you go down in square footage, it becomes more cost effective. It doesn't become fully cost effective. But it's another thing I just want to point out with 8-30G. The state regulations on 8-30G say that affordable units have to be equal and comparable to market rate units. So if you're building an affordable market rate 1-bedroom at 750 square feet, then your affordable 1-bedroom has to be 750 square feet. I think there's an argument to be made that we may be forcing a middle class standard upon a lower income household. And if we could actually build a 620 square foot 1-bedroom, the cost of construction would go down and the cost of rent would go down, and it would actually be more affordable. And just for the record, I lived in a 620 square foot 1-bedroom myself at a period in time, so it's not unreasonable. The point being here, even though I'm looking at single family housing here, the point being is that size matters in the context of cost. And the larger the size of the unit, the higher the cost is going to be. So I gave you that graphic in the beginning showing you housing size and lot size increasing in space and time moving outwards. I've now basically said, if you can reduce the size rather than the 2,500 square foot down to 1,800 square foot or whatever, and if we did this with rental units, the same being true, you can actually achieve some greater affordability just through the adjustment of the size of the unit in comparison to construction costs. So with that, I will say thank you.
We have one more question from Kevin.
Unmute yourself, Kevin. Get ahead of you on that one.
There we go. Okay. I think. I just want you to say that again because the last comment about imposing well, we won't go there. The comment reminded me a little bit of the history of the automobile industry, right? So everybody wants a big car. So we're going to build big cars for everybody and therefore make them less affordable for a lot of people. And you're saying that the law, in fact, right now, or at least this law, would not entertain building a three bedroom or a 2-bedroom unit with bedrooms that are smaller than a standard 3-bedroom or 2-bedroom unit.
Right. It's
okay.
It's the state.
I thought that's what you said, but it just sort of spun my head around a little bit because if the goal is affordability, I'm not sure I understand that.
Yeah, and it goes back to kind of my early slide where I talked about wealth and land and space consumption. With increased wealth, we consume more space. But then when we get to 8-30G and the state regs behind it, it basically says that if you use Corian countertops in your market rate units, you have to use Corian in the affordable units. If the market rate units are 1,000 square feet, the affordable units have to be 1,000 square feet. And I think it's an area that, from a public policy perspective, needs discussion. That maybe both deserve Korean countertops. Maybe I like them, but at the end of the day, the square footage I think should definitely be in play for discussion because you could gain some affordability there. If that's all, I'll turn it back to you, Tom. Todd.
Thanks, Don. Before I have you go, actually, Kevin had raised an issue that the 830G number that we're looking at, that 600 units, it's actually a very large number. As Don, you kind of outlined in your presentation, if we only used zoning or inclusionary zoning or 830G as a requirement, that's a lot of housing, market rate housing units to be produced to achieve that number. So if you could just comment on that. You referenced it a couple times in your presentation, how it as a sole tool is not going to achieve the kind of meeting.
Yeah. I mean, I guess from Kevin's perspective, yes, it could be worse. You could have to build 1,200. That's one way of looking at it. I guess the biggest challenge is the numerator and the denominator are constantly shifting. So say every development in West Hartford moving forward had 20% affordable units. You'd be adding 80% market rate units. Therefore, your total housing unit number is continually going up, and therefore your 10% qualifying is continually going up. So you're chasing it. It's hard. Realistically, are you going to achieve it in a short period of time? I haven't done any number calcs, but for you guys, but I was doing a plan in, I think, Ellington, Connecticut, and even if they did everything they possibly could, it was going to take them like 78 years to achieve it. And that was assuming like every development had 30% affordable units. So it is hard to chase. But I think at 600, it's a worthy goal to have. And if anyone could achieve it, it would be a West Hartford versus a rural Tolland. But I'm not saying you're gonna achieve it. So
right, and I just wanted to put that into some context. If we look back, if we used to even the Ellington 20% example, Don, I think that leads not adjusting for the incremental increase as we're building more market rate units, but let's just hold that constant. And that's 3,000 units of new housing. If you look back, we haven't produced 3,000 units of market rate housing in the last 20 years for the whole community. So it's a big number. It's a challenge. I just want to kind of ground the group. And yes, I agree. It could be worse. Ellington.
And just to be clear, I will on the next deliverable I do for you, I will take a look at those historical numbers and use them as a way of projecting future numbers and maybe giving some context to what's achievable. But it's a problem overall in Connecticut. If you just think about it, a different presentation I do, I have this slide that shows back in the 1980s, Connecticut, statewide building were 28 to 30,000 issued per year. In the boom of the early 2000s, after the recovery from the 1990s, I think our best year was 11,000. And since the crash of 2008, I think our best year in statewide housing permits has been around 6,500. Put that in perspective, in a report I did for another region of the state, how do you actually produce affordable housing if you don't have demand for housing overall? And that's the challenge. So you saying, Todd, you haven't produced that much housing in the past few decades gets to that point. You've got to build a lot of housing to get those affordability numbers up.
Thanks, Don. I want to go to both Matt and Greg before we let you go. We have one other item on our agenda. And
Sure.
just before we go to Matt and Greg, Don will be back at our July meeting, and he's got a reference. He'll have more data and West Hartford specific data to present to the group. So it will not be the last time that we get to meet and hear from Don. Matt, I have you first on my screen, so go ahead.
I appreciate the fact you're bringing the data. That was part of what I wanted to ask for, was to get the data on housing permits and building that we've done in West Hartford in the past, historical numbers. But two things I just wanted to say real quick. One is, I don't think it's a lack of necessarily demand in Connecticut for housing. I think it's in part a lack of maybe the numbers not working for on the developer side, where we're not necessarily building enough housing. But I do think that the prices have shown that there is demand for housing. The other piece I want to say is that, well, I think that, us talking about getting to that 600, 700 number for 830G is gives us some sort of numerical context. I don't know that our purpose is necessarily to hit the 830G 10% goal. And I view our purpose as a group is more to come up with a plan that is structuring a way for us to have a more inclusive town in terms of building diverse housing stock, as opposed to hitting any particular number. So just in terms of the way we talk about the issue, which I know we had one of these meetings previously talking about this, I think it's important to sort of keep us grounded in we're not trying to just find 600 units so that we get out of 830G, right? We're trying to figure out a way that we are building diverse housing stock long term. So, thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Greg?
I think I largely share Matt's sentiments there, and particularly I think that Mr. Poland sort of previewed this when he started talking about 8-30G at the front as an imperfect tool. We don't need to build 3,000 units to get 600 affordable units. We could build 600 affordable units if that's what we choose to do. So I think there's a moral calculus, there's a political calculus, there's a lot of calculus that goes into it. And, I know there's been recent reporting that the state has spent 35% less on affordable housing the past few years than in previous years, and that there's, hundreds of millions of dollars available and unallocated for spending on affordable housing. So I think we need to, really take what Matt said to heart, which is that, we're really looking at building housing stock and serving folks that need to be served, and not just be cabined by 8-30G or cabined by what is profitable from a particular direction of development.
Understood. I think Gail's waving.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. Going back to what Matt said, however, West Hartford in population is an older population. We have a lot of elderly people who have left West Hartford, and their houses have gone up for sale as they move to, warmer climates or whatever. So I think you don't see as many new houses being built because the market has a lot of available houses just because of people leaving here. And also, with the new construction, there really isn't much land available in West Hartford for new housing. So I think you have to put that into the mix too.
Thank you, Gail. Not seeing any further questions for Don. Don, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you.
And look forward to seeing you in July.
Thank you, Don.
Ryan, I'll turn it over to you now.
Very good. Thanks, Todd. And again, a huge thank you to Dr. Poland for the presentation and really a well put together slide deck for us to consider. There's tons of information in there for us to digest. So I look forward to going through that in a little bit more depth. I'm sure you all will as well. Also a thank you to Dwayne and Rick for joining this evening, and look forward to your continued participation in the group as you're able to do so. So just moving forward very quickly, in the interest of everyone's time this evening, just wanted to bring you up to date on a couple of additional outreach events that we held. One was actually it was a collaborative event hosted by our economic development coordinator, Kristen Gorski. She held a community job and resource fair on the 25th of May. And was kind enough to put out one of our message boards in addition to handing out probably close to 60 or so flyers with a QR code on there to our survey, and then in addition URLs to our website that has some additional information. And then in addition to that, on the 11th, I hosted a table at Celebrate West Hartford and talked to lots of folks from the community about affordable housing, many of which expressed a need of their own to find affordable housing. And so I handed out a number of flyers myself. Unfortunately, despite many great conversations with people, it didn't result in a heck of a lot of survey responses. Between the 25th and today, we've got a net total of about 20 additional responses. So it brings us up to 1,258 total responses for the entire survey period, which, I think all in all, I'm pleased with that number. I was certainly hopeful that we would get more out of these most recent outreach efforts, but it is what it is, as they say, and we will continue to push forward. We're going to continue to keep the survey open and continue to message the fact that it is. And so that's sort of the outreach piece for now. So moving forward, as Todd indicated, Mr. Poland's going to be back in July with some more detailed data regarding West Hartford's numbers. We look forward to engaging the data analysis subcommittee at that point, and for them to kind of dig into that data, determine whether or not anything is missing, whether they need additional information. And we're happy to have an additional meeting with that subcommittee if need be, beyond just the 18th, to get everything that needs to be everything that they need in order to come to a consensus that hey, we've got all the data we need in order to move forward with some plan recommendations. And so that would be the next step following in August, is kind of laying out a menu of options that Todd and I have found through looking at other communities' affordable housing plans, in addition to, perhaps introducing some of our own ideas into again, a menu of various policy options that we might consider for West Hartford in the final adoption of the plan. So that's just sort of laying out generally the next couple of months and how we intend to proceed. If anybody has any questions, feel free to get in touch with us, and we can answer those as we receive them. So Todd, I don't know if you had anything else for this evening, but if not,
I see Kevin's hand up, Brian. So.
Okay. Kevin, go ahead.
Process question. Do you have in mind, the co-chairs, I guess, a completion target for this work? And that's one. And two, and I think I've asked this before, it is difficult for at some point, all of us are going to be looking at recommendations. Not all of us will have participated in making those recommendations. There will be different degrees of participation depending on which of the subcommittees you are on. It's not easy to gather what goes on in these subcommittees when there's, it would be more helpful if there could even be just the most summary of reports about what has happened that everyone would have access to.
Kevin, I think that's. Hang on, Kevin. Let me mute you. We can certainly provide summaries when we hold the subcommittee meetings. especially if we're holding a subcommittee meeting that is completely apart from one of the larger group meetings. And so that's not a problem, and we can do that. I think in terms of a target date for the completion of the report, Todd and I are looking at likely October timeframe before we have something together and in a form that's relatively complete. Although, you know, I think we'd like to have a draft, at least a loosely put together draft by sometime in September.
And that largely depends on our ability as a group, and obviously the data that we get from Don that will inform that next phase, Kevin. You know, we need to base that last most important piece of the plan on both community outreach and the data that exists and our ability to meet over the course of the summer months. You know, I don't want to hold us to that target, you know, of October. That we think that's achievable. We might need to meet more frequently. And any subcommittee groups, we would definitely do a report back. We only had one true real subcommittee, community subcommittee. And after that, we kind of just had those meetings and we had multiple people attend. So that's the idea moving forward from today. And that's going to be largely dependent on Dr. Poland's ability to generate all the data we need for our July meeting that will carry us forward to that next phase of the plan discussion. Any other questions? Seeing none, I would very much like to thank everyone's time. And before I turn it back to Tricia, wish everyone a happy and healthy 4th of July holiday season. Tricia, I'll turn it back to you.
Yep, I echo everything that Todd just said. So have a good evening, everyone, and I will see you back in July.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night and a great holiday.